Hi, today I'd like to talk to you about a setup for black known as the Gurgenidze. It's not an opening as such. It tends to be a setup which you can achieve from a number of different openings. It involves basically a wall of pawns on light squares where you swap off your light squared bishop and establish a knight outpost on f5. You can get this from an f4 Sicilian sometimes, but your main way of achieving this position is from an advanced variation of a Caro-Kann or from a Pietz or modern. Let's have a look at the moves. The setup tends to work when white has a structure with a pawn on e5, a pawn on d4, and a pawn on f4. Now black's Gurgenidze setup involves a pawn on d5, a pawn on h5. Bring this bishop out and swap it off either for this knight or for this bishop. It's basically you swap off your bad bishop. Once the bishop is off, you play e6, g6, and your knight will go via h6 or e7. Oops, let's pick that king up, and sit itself on f5. And basically it sits there for the whole game and really causes white enormous headaches. In some lines of it, you can actually bring your other knight in and support it. So for example, if the bishop goes to take it off, let the bishop take it and then you sit the other knight there for the whole game, and really causes white some enormous problems. Now, the actual exact moves to how to achieve this position, I'll just go through a couple very quickly here. One way you can get it is in e4, c5, f4. If you play this variation against the f4 Sicilian and they push, you can play h5 now. And your next moves, regardless of what white plays, bishop here, knight here, here, just say they decide to get rid of it, something like this, oops, and then knight comes in, you can even play this here, bring the knight in, and essentially the knight will sit here for the whole game. The main ways of achieving this position would be in the Caro-Kann, e4, c6, d4, d5, e5. Bishop comes out. It's even possible to play h5 itself here. If they play that, you're absolutely laughing. Again, swap the bishop off and bang, 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 bring the knight into f5. And the other way, of course, of achieving this position after e4, c6, d4, g6 in a modern, or a Pietz. Sometimes you can play it from d6 followed by d5, but your main thing here, after say f4 for example, d5, push, and then h5, and once again you'll bring the bishop out, swap it off, play e6, and essentially get your knight to f5. Now, I'll go through the positional themes of this setup. The main thing revolves around the fact that the knight sits on f5 for the whole game, and it's up to white to try to dislodge that knight. Now, the main way white will try to dislodge it, or I suppose the most common way, would be to play g4, but obviously you can't play g4 here because of the pawn on h5. So you sort of look for ways like h3 followed by g4. Although this is where things get tricky. If white plays an early h3, black has this move, h4. So we just cement the knight on f5 forever. So of course if g4 happens, you take via en passant, and there's no way the pawn's ever going to get to that knight. Now, the most sensible way to do this would be to play g3 first, and follow up later on with h3, and then g4, because of course after h3 we can't play this, and then g4. That said, even if you do get this in, the knight can often sit here as well, so whether that works particularly well or not, it all depends on the exact position. If you can get this and get the knight in here, sometimes it's very good. If the knight ends up doing nothing here, well then it's not so good. The other problem here for white is once you play h3, you have to keep this defended, so of course you're going to have a position where perhaps your king or even your bad bishop or whatever is going to have to defend this. In any case, it's actually a very slow plan. Now, if white does achieve it, say white ends up with a bishop here and maybe the king here or something or other, or a rook perhaps, it doesn't really matter what. If they do achieve it and get g4 in, it's even that's not so bad for black. Black can anticipate g4 by moving the knight back to h6, or black can just simply allow g4, swap, and then have an open line for the rook. Knight can come in here, even knight sitting back here can work. It's not all about the knight though. So I do want to show where some of the other pieces go. where was this bishop? With the rest of your development, you tend to leave the rook at home on h8. So of course, with developing the bishop, a lot of people will put the bishop here, but I actually don't believe it's the best square. I actually think this is the best square, e7. The bishop controls this diagonal, and also this one. So if in the case that you do sort of get your g4 type plan in, the bishop can support the knight coming to here, or even get an annoying check in somehow. Once you've developed your actual bishop, it's then time to worry about the king. And again, a lot of people will castle, but I actually think it's quite illogical. I think the rook's very good on h8, so I think a better system is king f8, followed by king g7. And now, in a situation like this, once again, if white gets this in, this open line for the rook is very, very useful. So that's your king and your bishop. As for your queen side, again, you're not going to win the game just by sitting a knight here and doing nothing. Of course, you're going to have to develop your pieces on the queen side. So your general ideas will be after a6 to prevent a piece, say a knight for argument's sake, getting into b5, you'll play for c5, so a6 first, just to prevent this sort of thing. c5, and of course, if you can swap this pawn for this one, you've got a huge advantage here. Moves like this. And just building up in a kind of a French or a Caracan type setup. Even you might recognise this sort of thing from maybe a Queen's Gambit with reverse colours. Of course, if they protect this with c3, you can either play this type of setup and attack the weak pawn. Notice the knight's very good for this. Attack this weak pawn here, or in some positions, you can even push to c4 and then push b5, a5, b4, and really just try to storm down the board on the queen side. You know, it all depends on the exact position. You can't sort of give an exact best situation here because it all depends on what white does. Now, just a few more things. The big question you often get in these sorts of positions is how to deal with it if white does actually swap the knight off. First things first, in some cases you can actually cement the knight by using the other knight. So, of course, if the knight comes off, then the other knight comes into f5. And again, it's at some point it's going to be an absolute headache. Ideally, if you get this type of position, your best minor piece exchange now will be this knight for this bishop. So, say for argument's sake, this move happens. You'll swap this, and now you have an endgame where you've got a very strong knight against a bad bishop, and you'll win this endgame, I would say 9 times out of 10. You know, of course you're not going to win the endgame if it's this type thing, but you know, you're not going to get into that type of situation. One more thing too is if you can't actually cement the knight, for example, I'll just put a few pieces on the board. If you can't actually defend the knight with the other knight and you'll have to take back with a pawn, you sort of have a pleasant choice. If you take back with this pawn, you've still really made sure they've kept this bad bishop on the board, which is really favourable to you. And you can actually use this open g-file, so king may move out of the way after perhaps something like this. And this is going to be very helpful for you. This pawn can push itself further down. The other option, of course, is after, which piece am I using? Is after takes, you can actually take back this way. And now this strong e6 square can be very useful for a knight to sit itself on. So if the knight's developed this way, you can play knight d8 and then e6. And if you've developed the knight via d7, it can often go to f8 and then back into e6. And again, it's just a very solid knight there. And once again, if this knight comes off for the bishop, although you've sort of got a few doubled pawns and you may even have an isolated pawn in some lines, but again, you've got a very strong knight versus a bad bishop. It's something like this, you're doing very, very well here, you know, regardless pawns here or here. Very, very strong endgame for black. Now, just the final thing I'd like to say about it, and this is a very common question amongst a lot of people when I teach them this system, is does it work against any other setup other than e5, d4, and f4? And the answer to that is yes, you can play it against another setup, but it's not going to be as good. It works perfectly when white has committed this pawn to f4. So, bishop's off, obviously. In this position, the white bishop can never really get out sensibly. It can come out this way, but it's very slow. If white has played the system without f4, your Gurgenidze is not as good, because the black squared bishop can come to life this way. Of course, it's not bad to play this for black, and it's definitely not better for white, but white's doing better than they would be in this case here. If you see this structure, you're doing very well with black. If the pawn's back on f4, you're still doing okay, although it's not going to be as strong. But you'll still be able to beat people with it, but not quite as easily as you'll be doing when they've committed this pawn. I hope this has given you a good start for potentially playing the Gurgenidze. Of course, you'll need to look it up in a book or look at Grandmaster games with it to get a better feel for it. But it's the sort of thing you'll learn mostly from playing it. There's some openings you'll learn from essentially looking at them in a book, but this is the sort of thing you get experience playing it. The more you play it, the better you'll get at it. Hope you enjoy and good luck with it in future as black. Thank you.